Well, now it is a great honor for me to introduce to you for the first time Dr. Scott Stromatt. Dr. Stromatt is the CMO of GeneTx Biotherapeutics. Scott is board certified in internal medicine and has over 28 years of experience in the biopharmaceutical industry, including 3 years as a biotechnology analyst on Wall Street. I didn't know that about you. Wow, I have more respect. He's conducted many clinical trials, many of which have been in the rare disease space like cystic fibrosis, AML, and Lou Gehrig's disease. And he has been an amazing colleague to work with, and I am very excited for you to hear from him today. In addition, last year you met, many of you not for the first time, but some of you for the first time, Miss Jennifer Panagoulias. Yes, she's pretty amazing. She's pretty amazing. She's another one of those amazing people. We've had a lot of those on the stage today. So Jennifer is the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at GeneTx Biotherapeutics. She has a long history in rare disease, and she has a most recent history in antisense oligonucleotide. She worked for over 20 years with a primary focus in advancing global development programs for the treatment of rare neurological disorders. So she has a lot of experience in both rare disease, neurologic diseases, and antisense oligonucleotides. So without further ado.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison, and good afternoon.
Oh, yeah. It's okay, I'll introduce you. No, I will introduce you. I was like, where is she? And I was like, not to make a big deal about it because I didn't see you. And then I was like, well, she'll come up when she wants to come up. Okay, I'll introduce you. No, I do that. That's my job. I'm not standing on the stage, so I get to introduce you. So Yael Weiss, she is not related to me by the last name Weiss or to my children, but we have a similar last name without the E, so I'm a Weiss. But Dr. Weiss is the Vice President of Business Development at Ultragenyx. Yael has been an amazing support for the Angelman community. She met Angelman Syndrome about 3 years ago, and it's been a beautiful collaboration and road having Yael meet our community and meet the patients. And she is somebody that you need to stop in and talk to whenever you see her throughout the weekend because she really does have love for our kids. So that's been wonderful. I'll let you talk about more of your longevity at Ultragenyx, but she has a lot of experience in drug development, and she has a lot of experience at looking at various different programs and various different diseases and therapeutics for rare disease and ultra rare disease. So she comes to us with a very, very long history. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Before Jennifer and I talk about the clinical program, we wanted Yael to talk about the partnership between Ultragenyx and GeneTx. You probably heard about that earlier this year and why Ultragenyx was interested in GeneTx. So, yeah.
So first of all, thank you, Allison, for the kind introduction. And thank you for having Ultragenyx here. It's our first year here. And Allison said in the morning that we're dipping our toes. No, we're fully immersed, Allison. There's no dipping toes here. You don't let us dip our toes. You're way too enthusiastic. And this is a great community. It's really emotional and exciting to stand here in front of you and to be embraced by the community, and especially by Donna Young. She's like a top embracer, so go to get embraced by her. Sorry, Donna, I had to give you a shout out. And just so that you know, the Ultragenyx team is sitting over there, and please stop by and speak with all of them, especially when they're holding a drink in their hands. They're great people. So since this is our first time here, I did want to say a few words about Ultragenyx. I did say we are fully immersed. We met with the GeneTx team, the full team, in February, so less than a year ago. And it's been quite a journey to walk this path with the GeneTx team. We had a chance to meet with Angelman parents. We invited a few parents from the Bay Area to come into Ultragenyx and talk to us and tell us about their daily life, the great moments of the day and the tougher moments of the day, so that we understand what we need to achieve in order to help all of you. So this was quite again, emotional and amazing interaction with these families, and I'm very happy that we did it. And our other touch point with Angelman families has been in our family day. So we have an annual family day at Ultragenyx in which we invite patients and families that are affected by rare diseases to come to Ultragenyx. We have a fun day with games for the kids. There's always a great band. Emil's in charge of the band. So it's a mystery. We never know what the band is, and it's always a great one. And it's an amazing day, and I'll ask Paula to post on your social media page before the next event so that anyone who's interested in joining can come. So we're dedicated to rare genetic diseases, dedicated to patients, and let me see if I can figure out the slides. The reason, so Allison asked me to tell you why we chose to work with GeneTx. And again, she got it all wrong. They chose to work with us, and we're so lucky that they chose to work with us. But if I do have to tell you why we wanted to work with them, it's based on the fact that, first of all, they're an awesome team. They're doing a great job. They're agile. They're a small team, but working very fast and very, very deliberate and very meticulous, thanks to Jennifer and Scott and the rest of the GeneTx team. But the science and the approach to the treatment of Angelman actually fits exactly to our perspective on which drugs to develop and how to choose which drugs to develop and how to develop them. So if you look on the left side of the slide, you will see that we choose science that is based on, as you heard from other companies, which is a common theme, based on clear disease and an understanding of how the drug will work in the disease. So obviously the approach that the GeneTx is taking fits into this criteria that we have when we look at programs and choose which programs to develop. And obviously we want to treat patients who are suffering from an unmet need, that there aren't any solutions or there are few solutions for their disease. And we try to be the first drug ever in this disease. Maybe in the case of Angelman it won't be the case, but we hope we will have a good drug that will work and make a difference in your lives. And it will change the course of the disease, and hopefully your kids will see benefits and be different after they're treated. The left hand of the slide is what we feel we can contribute to the GeneTx team. They've done a great job up till now. As I said, worked very fast. You will hear the progress from Scott and from Jennifer in a minute. What we bring to the table currently as their collaborators at the moment, we are able to support their clinical development plans, support the regulatory plans, manufacturing, and everything else that will help them bring the drug into the clinic. So it's very exciting for us, and we can't wait to give you all the great news about this program. And now the next slide is just to show you what other diseases we're working on. So we're not working only on CNS diseases. We work on bone and endocrine diseases, metabolic diseases, and we do have a specific focus on neuromuscular diseases and CNS diseases. So Angelman fits very well into our portfolio, and we feel that, again, we can enhance GeneTx's efforts and synergize and bring a great program to patients. So I'll hand it over to Scott and to Jennifer to tell you more about the program.
Thank you. It's an absolute privilege to be here to speak with you today. I was here last year. It was the first conference that I got to speak at, and I told you a little bit about the work that we were doing at GeneTx and what had to be done and why it takes so long. So I'm happy today to give you some important updates and to say that we've done a tremendous amount over the last year. And we've worked with care, but with a sense of urgency. And that's very important to the team, but also to me, because my own family is affected by Angelman syndrome. So what I'm going to talk to you today is how caregiver input informed our study design. You're going to hear more about that from Scott. But what's shown here is a graphic that comes from FDA's website on patient-focused drug development. And so what is patient-focused drug development? Essentially, it's really a systematic approach to get input from patients and from caregivers of patients to inform a drug development program. And it may seem like, why don't you always do this? Isn't this something that always happens? And as Allison said, I've been in this industry for a long time, and way back when, we didn't always do the best job of collecting those inputs. And so you might have the company and FDA and doctors at the table, but the most important voice wasn't always there, and that's the voice of the family. And so over time, I would say really in particular over the last 6 years, this is something that's gained prominence at FDA, where they're trying to standardize this process and ensure we're getting inputs from the key stakeholders, from families, about what you want to see in a development program and what's important to you in enrolling in a clinical study. And this really took off with an act called 21st Century Cures, which was bipartisan legislation passed in late 2016 that was intended to help expedite development of therapies for rare diseases. And under Cures, FDA had an objective to put in place 4 guidance documents that basically outline how we're supposed to collect this input and how they're going to use it. They're going to use it in their regulatory decision making. And why is this important? Because you are the experts. You know what it's like day to day. I think it was 2 weeks ago now, I was at a meeting with the Deputy Commissioner of FDA, and she was talking about their experiences with patient-focused listening sessions where organizations come in and talk to them about certain disease areas. And what she said is, we have medical people, doctors at FDA that review these programs, but they're not experts. We know what we learned maybe in medical school or what we read, but we're not the experts. And they've learned so much through these efforts. And she talked in particular about rare diseases. Her background is in oncology, so she's primarily worked on cancer programs. And she said, I didn't have an appreciation for some of these aspects of what families deal with in rare disease. And in particular, she mentioned sleep. She said, through these listening sessions, I have learned in rare disease how impactful sleep is. And that especially in children, it's not just the child that is impacted by lack of sleep, it's the entire family. It's mom and dad, and everybody in the family would benefit from a change in sleep. And that's something that she's learned is so meaningful. And so that's why those inputs are really important to us. And so what we're trying to do through this is make sure that we have that voice in the development plan. And really, most importantly, to identify practices that are going to help facilitate enrollment in clinical trials. You've heard about a lot of trials today, so it's really important that we get that right and that we reduce the burden. And Dr. Kakis said this morning that, it's not fun to be in the trial, unfortunately. And so what we want to do is make sure that we design it in a way that tries to minimize that burden to the family. So what we did in planning our program was, in the fall, we had a caregiver advisory board. And so we had 7 caregiver advisors that spoke to us, and they gave us really thoughtful feedback. We gave them an overview of what we were thinking about in terms of the protocol and what would be involved, what assessments we would perform, what a visit schedule might look like, and what procedures would be involved. And in particular, we wanted to know, what's the best way to really communicate what's involved in the study, what the requirements are? And is that manageable for you? What is and what is not manageable? And what can we do to make it easier and less stressful for you as a family? And so just high level, what we heard was some really great advice that I'm not sure we would have come up with on our own, and we're going to factor this into our plans. And so just some of the highlights are, we heard from the families, a storyboard would be a great way to get my child ready to go to the clinic. And so I'd love to be able to sit with my son or daughter and take them through what's going to happen. You're going to go to the clinic today. You're going to meet the following people. This is what's going to happen. And really to take them through and get them ready so it's not just a surprise when we leave the house. And to have a fact sheet. So you get an informed consent form if you've been part of a clinical study that details all of the risks and potential benefits and things that are involved. And this can be a really dense 15-page document with all kinds of stuff, and it's hard to remember what's in there. So a real focused fact sheet, just the facts on information beyond the consent, things that we need to know and things that we can go back to and reference would be really helpful. And really think about minimizing the procedures. You want to do it all and collect as much information as you can, but please take it down to what you really need to do, and in particular around blood draws. That causes stress for the whole family, so think about that when you design a study. If we think about monitoring and sort of like wearable devices, what to avoid there, that was a clear message to us, is avoid things that have to be worn on the wrist. That's not practical. To have comfort items, it's a long day. So if you're going to a clinic visit and a lot of things have to happen and you're there for several hours, that's a long day for the family and for the child. And so have comfort items. Maybe have toys, and if it's a pediatric population in particular, have age-appropriate toys. Have things for the parents, have snacks. If people have to travel to a study site, then you really need to think about a travel service, but it is definitely not one size fits all. Everybody's family needs are different, and that should be sorted out upfront and adjusted to the specific needs of the family. And to think about things if you have to stay overnight just because it's convenient to be closer to the site. Then think about the needs of a child with Angelman Syndrome, and do you need to have safety sleepers and whatnot. And there are lots of other feedback that we got, and we're going to really take that to heart. And I want to just again thank the caregivers that took the time to give us that feedback and to really dedicate themselves to that effort, because that feedback is really invaluable to us. And I'll turn it over to Scott.
Thank you, Jennifer. So as you know, you've heard today that Angelman syndrome is related to the loss of the function of the UB3A protein in the central nervous system. It impedes neuronal communication, so it's not really a degenerative disease, it's a biochemical disease. And GTX-102 is an investigational antisense oligonucleotide that's intended to silence, or unsilence rather, the UB3A gene from the father. Now, Dr. Scott Dindo has worked on this gene for over 10 years. And so he created a lot of antisense oligonucleotides that were very potent because he knew exactly where he wanted to go. And so his ASOs are far more potent than topotecan, which you heard earlier today was a chemotherapeutic agent that was used to unsilence the father's gene. So in a mouse model of AS, ASO has shown to reduce the symptoms. We have done a number of preclinical studies, pharmacology studies, that shows that it decreases the UB3A antisense levels in the brains of monkeys, that GTX-102 increases UB3A protein expression of the paternal allele in monkeys. We've done a number of studies looking at safety, toxicology studies, and those inform the safety and the conduct for the clinical trial that will be starting. Antisense oligonucleotides are generally single-strand DNA, RNA molecules. They target the RNA that alters RNA expression, that alters then protein expression. And production of these molecules goes on across the world at commercial manufacturing plants. ASOs were out around 30 years ago, and the initial molecules were toxic. They didn't stick around very long, they were degraded. And over the years, tremendous strides have been made in the chemistry. So they're much more potent, they last much longer, they're not as toxic. And in fact, you can see in the last 5 years, there's been a host of oligonucleotides that have been approved for a variety of indications. And in fact, the FDA has received over 270 applications for oligonucleotides. So as a therapeutic class, it's really come into its own. Now, clinical research is regulated by the FDA. And the key questions that we have to answer in a clinical trial: is it safe? Does it work? And what's the best dose? And so the phase 1/2 trial for GTX-102 is a first-in-human study. It involves repeat dosing of the molecule. It's dose escalation. You're going at higher doses. It's given intrathecally. And you've heard about that already. It's a lumbar puncture, a spinal tap. It's a needle between the vertebrae and the lower back. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions, and there's been tremendous strides in that procedure. There's a new atraumatic needle that causes far fewer headaches that used to be associated with it. The trial will be open label. There will be no placebo or sham control, so every patient will get GTX-102, and following that, they will receive open label extension. The study objectives: the primary study objective is safety of GTX-102. Secondary is the pharmacokinetics. It's basically how does the drug behave in your body. So we'll look at drug levels over time in the blood and in the CSF. CSF is a cerebral spinal fluid, the fluid that bathes the spinal canal or spinal cord and the brain. Then there's a whole host of exploratory objectives. we're looking at the pharmacodynamics. What effect does it actually have on the body? What we presume was what we'll see in the monkeys is you'll see an increase in the father's expression of that protein, UB3A. We'll also look at clinical activity. And again, there's a lot of functional domains, a lot of differences in the patients, and so we're looking at all these different domains to see where we can make the impact. Now, the overview of the trial is that there's a screening period of 2 to 4 weeks. There's then treatment, and then there's follow-up for 6 weeks after the last dose. Now, it will have an open label, as I said, so patients that are in the study will continue to get the drug. The dosing is a dose escalation study. We start at a low dose. We'll treat a number of patients at the low dose if it's safe. Then we'll treat a new group of patients at a higher dose and go through safety there, and so forth. Now, this will require administering the drug by intrathecal or the lumbar puncture. It will require some anesthesia. Should be able to handle with a simple mask. Short-acting anesthesia, about 10 to 20-minute procedure, all said and done. And the patients that will come into the study will get treated at one dose, and then in the open label extension, they'll continue that. But once we identify the proper dose, then they will be escalated to that proper dose. Now, I told you that the primary objective is safety, and so we're looking at safety of a whole bunch of endpoints, any adverse symptom or sign. We're looking into checking blood and urine. We're doing physical and neurological exams throughout the study. We're doing an ECG, which is a tracing of the heart's electrical activity. We're monitoring vital signs, blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, respiratory rate. And then we're checking the cerebral spinal fluid to check for any signs of inflammation from administering this drug. Now, the questions that really we ask ourselves is, how do you prove that the drug works? And most importantly, how can we do it as quick as possible? What's the best measure for efficacy? What measure can be consistently measured? You know, there's a lot of variability in patients, and these measures, people change day to day. And so what gives us the most robust measure that gives us a tight set of data that we can analyze? What functional domain is going to be the most amenable to GTX 102? And then finally, how fast can we see improvements? I posit that we'll see improvements in different domains at different times. It'll take longer to see improvement in some measures than in others. So you've heard a lot about the FAST-sponsored survey, and you can see in red the different things that are considered by parents to be most important for a new therapeutic: speech, seizures, mobility, cognition, life skills, and behavior anxiety. And so those are all functional domains that will be evaluated in this clinical trial. Busy slide, I'll walk you through all of them. This phase 1/2 trial will look at, I said, the pharmacodynamics, looking to see the father's protein, whether it increases in their cerebral spinal fluid. Communication, we're looking at the ORCA, the Bayley-4, and the Vineland. The Vineland and Bayley-4 are psychometric tools that look at a bunch of different functional domains, and here we're looking at the communication. We're also doing the ORCA, and I'm going to give a plug here. The ORCA is a tool that was developed by Communication after FAST met with the FDA last year. FDA reviewer told FAST and said, you should talk to Dr. Reese at Duke, because he can develop a tool for you that can really measure communication. So Dr. Reese at Duke has developed a tool that looks at expression, reception, and pragmatic communication. In fact, the tool's finished. He needs validation. So please go. They need 250 parents to finish the validation. They're sitting out there between the natural history booth and Ovid. So they would definitely appreciate your help. Seizures. We're going to do a seizure diary and a seizure EEG, or an overnight EEG, a video EEG. Because clearly in Angelman syndrome, you see difference in the brainwave patterns. So we're going to look at what it is at baseline and then what it is after the end of treatment. We're also going to look at sleep diary with a motion camera, a sleep wearable device, and an overnight EEG, because again, in Angelman syndrome, there is very characteristic brainwave patterns. And so again, we're going to see with treatment whether that changes. Now, we're asking for a sleep wearable device, and we're asking for a sleep diary because we know not all patients are going to be able to tolerate. So we're trying to look at this by 3 different ways, knowing that maybe 1 or 2 will be successful in measuring for a particular patient. The sleep wearable can be worn on the ankle, can be worn on the waist, could be worn on the wrist if people wanted. Now, the Actomya wearable device, you saw some data today. Very, very good device, can get nice, measurable data, continuous data in terms of stride length and falls. Then also the Bailey and the Vineland also look at motor skills. Cognition, also the Bailey and Vineland look at that, adaptive behaviors, the Vineland, and the aberrant behaviors checklist. We'll also be doing the global clinical assessment. This is done by the physician. We'll look at the beginning and at the end of treatment to see the changes that occur. Now, what's the status of the clinical trial? Site identification is ongoing as well as site qualification. 4 weeks before the first site is open, we will make an announcement on the website for FAST, for ASF, for genetics, and for Ultragenyx. On the GeneTx or the GeneTx website, as well as clinicaltrials.gov, you will find the full information about the clinical trial and the entry criteria. It's a first-in-human study. We plan to have the first patients enrolled in the first half of next year. The goal of the study is to understand safety. With that safety information, then we can expand into larger studies. The study status, as I said, will be updated when information becomes available. And so really, I want to thank everybody here. This community has worked so hard. You really, truly are blazing new trails for patients. So thank you. So I wanted to see if there was any questions.
Question on the possible side effects or worries for parents. I mean, I'm a physician and I'm also a parent here, and I guess personally we see lumbar punctures all the time in the ER and the hospital, and personally I'm not that concerned about the lumbar puncture or worry about putting a needle in the spine because it's such a common procedure that's very safe in the hospital. And I mean, every parent will have to look at that, personally, but as a physician, it's really not that big a deal. I know all the researchers worry about it tremendously with the needle going in the spine, but I'm really not. What we do worry about is, just for ASOs in general, what kinds of side effects do they tend to see, or what should we worry about?
Right. So the question is, what kind of side effects can we expect with ASOs? So ASOs have some class effects, which the FDA is concerned about. And these effects are more common when it's administered intravenously. You see them far less frequently when they're administered intrathecally. And the class effects that they worry about is a low platelet count. You actually see that with Spinraza, but it never gets terribly low. It gets down to 50,000. As a clinician, you don't start worrying about it until it's 30,000 or less. So that's one possibility, is an impact on platelets. The other is there can be renal and liver toxicity. Again, that's more common with the ASOs when they're administered IV. Hasn't been really reported per se when it's administered intrathecally. There's also, you get activation of inflammation, the alternative complement system. And so you could see inflammation. But again, you really don't see that when it's administered intrathecally. But those are considered 4 major class effects that the FDA wants every drug developer to monitor for in their clinical trials. And that's why we do the blood test, we do the urine test, to watch to see if that's developing or not.
Yeah, I had a question. We've talked today about ASOs, ATFs, and LNAs. I'm curious if, when administered into the CSF, if they all have a similar duration of action, or if some of these compounds might last longer in the body and therefore require less frequent administration.
Right. Well, the question is, how long will these drugs last? In the blood, they'll last 7-10 hours, and then it decreases. That's called a half-life. So about that time, 50%'s gone away. So in about 2 days, it's completely eliminated from the blood. In the CSF, we see it last much longer. We see it lasting for 2 weeks. Then in terms of a biologic effect, as you saw earlier, from Roche, they saw it out for 2 months, and we're seeing a similar thing too. And that's what you see with Spinraza. When you administer that intrathecally, they do a loading monthly for 4 months or so, and then after that, you can space out the LPs to every 3-4 months. So we anticipate a similar thing here with these ASOs.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So the question is, what age will we start with? Now, the reason nobody's been able to give you that answer is because we have to get the FDA's blessing. So the FDA is concerned about age and safety, right? And so that's the main issue. But my job as a clinician running this program is to get as many patients as fast as possible. So we have to do a focused clinical trial to prove safety. If we can't do it in all ages, we're planning now, the next study will be in patients when they're first diagnosed at 6 months. So as soon as we get safety, we want to start running that trial to get them when they're first diagnosed. So that's a crucial thing.
And do we not know yet how many phases? Will there be 1, 2, and 3 phases? Will it be 1 phase, 2 phase?
The question is, how many phases will there be in this study? You know, I've done studies where we've gotten approval in 75 patients. And so that was with a very large phase 1 study. Our partners, Ultragenyx, got approval with 12 patients. So it really depends upon the magnitude of the benefit that you see. Because this will be chronic, the FDA will be very keen on long-term safety. So you can get what is called an accelerated approval and get approval on very little bit of data, but you need to continue following patients for a long period of time to make sure there's safety and continued clinical benefit. So at this stage, planning a phase 1 and planning what we call phase 2-3. So as soon as we get safety, then we can go into much bigger study and do an interim analysis, and if the data is really good, get approval. Now, if the data is phenomenal in this phase 1, you know, we can keep our fingers crossed. That's why we're actually doing some things in this phase 1 to expedite the program overall. You know, I told you we're doing ECGs multiple times. The agency wants to make sure no drug causes torsades, which is a ventricular tachycardia. It's a very rare thing, and drugs can interfere with certain receptors in the heart. And so what we do is we look at the heart tracing to make sure that's not happening. So we're doing it very early to obviate that risk so we can try to get approval as fast as possible.
Hi, thank you so much. This is really exciting, obviously. My question is, besides the intrathecal injection of the drug, how often will you be checking the cerebral spinal fluid? Besides the injections, how often will they be receiving LPs? And also, if it's pretty frequently, is there anything being developed that's more of a port that could sort of be an easier access than doing sort of sedation for every procedure?
Right. So 2 questions there. In terms of a long-standing port, hopefully when we get to the maintenance, we're dosing every 4 months. So I think that'll be a great deal of safety. When I've treated patients in the past with Ommaya reservoirs, which is a permanent reservoir, you run the risk of infections. And in monkeys, non-human monkeys, when you have a long-term indwelling catheter, you run into issues. So you want to avoid that. And I'm sorry, the first part of the question was?
How often are you doing cerebral spinal fluid tests?
Oh, right. We're only getting CSF samples when we administer the drug. Okay. So we're not doing any samples. We talked about it, we thought about it, it'd be nice, but it's a lot for the patients, and we think it causes unnecessary risk and not worth it. So we're just getting the CSF sample just before we administer the drug. And there's a question here.
Are you pushing for approval for the FDA for both deletion and mutation?
You know, that's a question that we have to have the discussion with the FDA. So ultimately, we want to go there no matter what they say to us. So we'll definitely be working for that, towards that. Thank you.